Okay, continuing in our study of the book of Exodus, I realized something remarkable as I was studying these remaining chapters. Last time we got through the end of chapter 24, and we got to the point where we had the detailed explanation of the ceremony that God instructed Moses to take the people through to enter into the covenant. The amount of blood, the sprinkling of blood on the book, the sprinkling of blood on the altar, the sprinkling of blood on the people. And so God enters into a covenant with his people. Well, the next section, in fact, chapters 25 through 40 of Exodus, remaining the last 16 chapters, in large part are devoted to the design and the construction of the tabernacle. Now, there's a little parenthetical section, chapters 32 through 34, that deal with something other than the design or construction. Basically, what we have at the end of Exodus are 13 full chapters that are devoted to the design and the construction of the tabernacle. Now, compare that to the number of chapters that were used up for God to explain to us how he created the universe, the earth, all living creatures, and man. How many chapters? Anybody remember? 2. 2 chapters for all of creation. 13 chapters are devoted to the design and the construction of the tabernacle. Now, what does that tell you? Tommy says, that's some pretty boring stuff. I think it's going to be a boring lesson today. Well, there's a lot of detail there, and that's why it took, Moses spent 40 days and 40 nights up on the mountain writing. That's what he's writing. Now, I don't know if God gave him just written plans or written specifications. I hope he gave him a set of plans too. Wouldn't it be great to look at the set of plans? But we have just an awful lot of detail here. I'll submit to you that the reason why we have 13 chapters related to the design, particularly focus on the design and construction of the tabernacle, is because the tabernacle is very important, extremely important. Well, what's important about it? Well, I'll submit to you that there is tremendous symbolism in all aspects of the tabernacle and all of the elements of the tabernacle. I can't understand all of them. We'll understand some of them. We'll talk about some of them. But I'll suggest to you that, as Jesus said several times, that Jesus, he the Christ, is revealed in the Old Testament. And I'll submit to you that very much of what we're given about the tabernacle is a foreshadowing of Christ, and it is symbolic of Christ and what he was to accomplish. So I want to make sure that we don't miss anything here. I'm going to try to keep the lesson from being boring, even though we're going to go into a lot of detail. I hope we can at the end of it, if nothing else, I hope we can all say that, you know what, I know about that tabernacle. If I saw it somewhere, I'd recognize it. And I can tell you the size of it, I can tell you what was inside of it, and I think I can tell you what it means. So what I have set here in front of me, or beside me on the desk, is a model. This is a model that Brother Jim put together a couple of years ago when he led a study on the tabernacle. And I think it's very helpful. It's helpful to look at it and to visualize certain aspects of it. Number one, just to get a feeling for the size of it. And you'll see that it really wasn't very big. It wasn't very big at all. In fact, we're going to see that the structure of the tabernacle here was only, anybody remember how wide it is? It's only 10 cubits wide. Now, so how wide is that? 10 cubits, that's 15 feet. Let me step it off. How wide is this building? Is this building 20 feet wide? I think it's maybe not more than that. All right, the tabernacle is the width of it is only about from that wall to right here. That's how wide it is. And then how long is it? It's about
100.
You're wider than 10 feet.
No, 10.
You do
10 cubits.
10 cubits.
Say a cubit, that's 15 feet.
Yeah.
So you're going to have to go back over here.
10 each cubit is 1.5 feet. So 10 cubits would be 15 feet.
Okay.
All right. And then it's 30 cubits long, which would be, what, 45 feet?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
If you have to live in Bible, they had it all wrote in there. Added.
So this would be 10, so it's a little bit longer than that. So the Holy of Holy areas was 10 cubits by 10 cubits, so that one area was about this square, same height, 15 feet high, and the other was twice as big as that. So the whole tabernacle structure that we have here would fit inside of this building that we're in, with some room left over. So, not big at all. So don't ever confuse the tabernacle, which we have portrayed there, with the temple, which is right here. Okay? The tabernacle was designed and was built in the wilderness. And as we studied before, it was disassembled and it was carried around. It was utilized the entire 40 years that the children of Israel were in the desert. When they crossed over the promised land, they brought it with them. And the tabernacle was a place of worship for them until the temple was built. And we know that the temple was built much later. The temple was built during the time of King Solomon.
The temple has similarities.
It does, and we'll talk about that. In fact, I think the symbolism of the tabernacle was carried over into the temple, particularly the rooms of the temple and the elements that were inside of the temple. The temple was built approximately 966 BC during the reign of King Solomon. The tabernacle was designed, the design was given by God and was built right after the children of Israel left Egypt and in the beginning of their 40 years in the wilderness. So that would have been roughly 1446 BC. So that would have been about, 380 years before the temple was built. That's how long the tabernacle was in use. Okay. You can see that the entire courtyard that surrounded the tabernacle was not very big. We're going to read, I believe, that it was 50 cubits on one side and 100 cubits on the other side, so roughly 75 feet wide, 150 feet long. Not very big. The orientation of it was always significant. Like I said, it was made, it was designed and constructed so that it could be disassembled, packed up, and moved around. We've studied before the various tribes who did the different moving of the different elements of it, but when it was set up, it was always to be set up and it was to be oriented in a particular direction. What was that?
East.
That's right. The entrance always faced the east.
East, yep.
Okay? What's the significance of that?
Come from the east, didn't it?
Come from the east. Christ will come from, return from the east.
You come from the east, but it's always, there's much symbolism in the scripture that when people are moving to the east, they're moving away from God, but when they're moving from the east to the west, they're moving towards God. And so it is said that in order to enter into the courtyard and into the tabernacle itself, you had to be facing west, so your back was to the east. That was symbolic, if you will, of turning one's back on Ra, which was the god of the sun, which was the Egyptians, and the Egyptians would always worship to the east because that's where their sun god arose every morning. There's also something very significant here we'll study later on is I think the significance of the veil that separates the holy place from the Holy of Holies is symbolic of the River Jordan. And when the children of Israel crossed over the River Jordan into the Promised Land, they were going from the east to the west. So the journey is from the east to the west. But we're going to see there's all sorts of components, and there's all sorts of tremendous detail given. Like I said, we can understand, I can understand some of the symbolism and the detail that's given. Some of it, I'll confess it's over my head. I hope that someday that I'll understand it, but there's just a lot of detail, and I think there's important symbolism in every detail that we have of the tabernacle. Before we get into the details, any questions, any comments so far? I do want you to come and study this. When Jim put this together, he lashed down the coverings of it. We'll try to pull it back to expose the inside of it, but you'll see it's not very big, and there's not really very much room on the inside for the elements. I guess it's good that there really aren't very many elements on the inside, but I want us to all understand what's in there and what the significance of that is. You know, one of the questions you have to ask about this whole thing, and as we said, the first 2 chapters of Genesis are devoted to God's creation of the universe, the earth, all living things, man. God created, God said, and it was. Then we have 13 chapters that are devoted to the design and the construction of the tabernacle. One of the things we have to ask is, why didn't God just create the tabernacle? Just like he created everything else. Why did God give a design and tell the children of Israel that they had to build it? What do you think?
It involved trust, and it involved discipline. Maybe it involved growth.
And obedience.
Yeah.
And obedience, yeah. You got to follow God's plan. God gave specific, detailed, some would say boring plans. You got to follow all of them. You got to follow all my plans. You have to be obedient in your following my plans. I also read something interesting is that it is said that in the scriptures that God gave detailed plans for only 3 things. One of them was, of course, this. What were the other 2?
The ark.
Yeah, Noah's Ark. He
And
gave Noah specific plans, and then he gave specific plans to David and Solomon about the construction and the design of the temple. So, again, we're 1 out of 3 right here with this. The tabernacle is the precursor to the temple, so there's just tremendous symbolism, tremendous significance to it. And as we go through this, we'll go through in some detail. I want us to come to an understanding of what God was trying to tell the people and come to an understanding of the purpose of all this. So as we read through this, feel free to stop me at any time. And if you've got a thought, share it with the class. If you've got a question, let's throw it on the table and let's talk about it. Okay, I'll start with chapter 25. Tom, you at chapter 25?
Yeah, I've got it, but I'm gonna pass.
You gonna pass? Troy, you want to start?
And the Lord spoke unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, that they bring me an offering of every man that giveth it willingly with his heart. Ye shall take my offering. And this is the offering which ye shall take of them, gold and silver and brass, and purple and blue and purple and scarlet and fine linen and goat's hair, and ram's skin dyed red, and badger skins, and smitten wood, oil for the light, spices for the anointing oil, and for sweet incense, onyx stones and stones to be set in the ephod and in the breastplate. And let them make me a sanctuary, that I may dwell among them. According to all that I shall show thee, after the pattern of the tabernacle and the pattern of all the instruments thereof, even so shall ye make it.
All right, pause right there just a second. So this chapter starts off with God speaking to Moses, and he says, tell the sons of Israel to raise a contribution for him. So the first thing he does is he has a fundraiser, right? He's gonna gather all the materials, but from whom are these things to be gathered?
From the people.
From the people.
Willingly.
That's it. That's it. From every man, what? Whose heart moves him. Every man who is willing. And we see that several places. That God was not forcing these people to do this. He was saying that everyone who wants to contribute to the construction may do so. I'm giving you the opportunity to do so. And then I think this tells us an awful lot about why God allowed the people to build the tabernacle, rather than God just saying, let there be a tabernacle, and there was. He could have done that. Nobody has any doubt about that. God could have just said, poof, there it is, but he didn't. He said, I want the people to be involved in this. What is that symbolic of, if you will, in God's plan of redemption? Anybody have a thought on that? Think about who Jesus was. And think about how he came to be. You know, it's pretty clear even at this early stage that man has fallen and that man continues to sin. And even when God invites man to enter into a covenant relationship with him and gives him the rules that he is to follow, and even though man says, yes, all that the Lord has spoken I will do and I will be obedient, what happens? Man always fails. So man needs a Savior. God could have said, all right, boom, all your sins are forgiven without anything else. But he didn't do that. What was his plan? What did his plan involve?
Give man free will, to start off with,
That's right.
make his own decisions.
That's right. Well, that's true, and that's inherent. Man was free to make his own decisions, and boy, he made some bad ones, right? But then when in the fullness of time, God decided he was going to send the means by which man would be redeemed, and he did so how?
Through a baby.
Through a baby. But it's significant here that Christ came not as fully God, but he came as fully man and fully God. So he came in the flesh, in flesh and blood. And so that was, if you will, man's participation, the participation of flesh and blood in God's redemptive plan. And so I think we see that symbolism beginning here with the construction of the tabernacle.
So God wanted the people to take part in this. Is for a person to become a Christian, they have to do something.
Right.
They have to accept Christ
That's right.
and admit that they are a sinner. So is that kind of like part of it too?
I think that's exactly right. God, we say that Christianity is not performance-based, it's more faith-based. But even so, there are things that must be done in terms of belief, right?
Yes.
And in terms of knowing what God's commands are and then doing one's best to obey God's commands. And I think you hit the nail on the head there. And so God says, I want you to take a contribution from everybody who is willing, and he says, raise from them gold and silver and bronze and blue and purple and scarlet material, fine linen, goat hair, ram skin dyed red. And then some translations say porpoise skins. I think the King James says badger skins. And I think
Sea cows.
sea cows, yeah. So
Found a picture.
there's a particular type. What's that?
I found a picture
They're
of
like
this
an otter,
dugong, not a bigger.
bigger.
Yeah. So you got to wonder what this thing is. What's that?
That's them noggers, that nogger high.
There you go. That's probably what it was waterproof, because it was important that it be waterproof. They
The
don't
big
know it.
rascals make couches and stuff, cover couches with them.
You know,
It's not
pound for
animal.
pound, a badger is probably one of the worst, one of the baddest animals in
That's
the
what they're
kingdom.
talking
Yeah.
about.
And
Oh my gosh.
their skin is
Yeah.
very, very tough, and it's loose fit to their body.
Uh-huh.
Well, when something bites it, it don't get to the muscles that just pull to the skin
Uh-huh.
and everything.
Yeah.
And he picked a bad cookie to get that there out of it.
Well, so Jackie and I were talking this morning. We don't know what this was. Some translations call it a badger skin, which is a land animal. Some call it a sea cow or a porpoise skin, which is a sea creature. I don't know which it was, and evidently there's some confusion. It could have been either one. But I think the significance is, whatever it was a pretty tough hide, because we're going to read later on that was what was to form the outer cover over the tabernacle. So it had to be a couple of things. It had to be waterproof, right? And it also had to be durable and tough to be able to bear the heat of the sun.
What kind of wood is that that's called it?
That's a ugly creature.
Acacia wood.
Yeah, it's called acacia wood, or the King James calls it shittim wood.
Yeah.
But what the significance of that is, it's a very durable type of a wood. It's a wood that will last a very long time, and that's significant too. Jackie was saying, well, where do these people get all this stuff? Where do they get it? If this was indeed the skin of an ocean creature, or even if it was badger skin, where did they get it? Where did they get the gold and the silver? Did they mine it? Where did they get this
Yes.
cloth? Huh?
I didn't ask that. I know where they got that. It was the sea creature.
Yeah.
They're in the desert. Where did it come from?
Where did they get the stuff?
Tradesman.
Yeah.
Could be tradesmen, but they didn't have much to trade with except what? Where did they get most of their stuff?
From the Egyptians.
That's right. Remember when they left, the Egyptians basically said, don't go away mad, just go away, right?
Right.
And they just lavished all sorts of stuff on them. They said they gave them gold, they gave them silver, they gave them cloth. I think they gave them essentially everything they needed to construct the tabernacle. Now, they could have picked some stuff up from the tradesmen, but I think God was really kind of keeping them separated from everybody else. When they're out in the wilderness, the likelihood of them getting any sort of wood that you could construct even this with was pretty remote. So I suspect they even got the wood from the Egyptians. So, you know, it's interesting the way God worked. I think when it was time for them to leave, I think God moved the Egyptians to provide to the children of Israel everything that they would need, not only to survive, but also, I mean, you know, God provided the water and the food, of course, but provided to them everything they would have needed to build this particular structure here.
In that land over there with the, we have all these rocks and it's dry and everything.
Mm-hmm.
How could you even grow a tree over there?
Yeah.
They're real skimpy. Little,
Yeah, they had to import that wood.
Well, you talking about in Egypt? Well, Egypt would have had access. There are parts of Egypt, if you go in, I guess, to southern Egypt where there's some forest, and they would have traded the Egyptians. They traded with, you know, with all the world there. In fact, I read something the other day when I was reading about this whole climate change, global warming humbug, that there was a time when what is now the Sahara Desert was a lush jungle inhabited by a lot of people. And so there were areas, and there are areas in Africa that have a lot of wood. And so the timbers probably would have been harvested by the Egyptians and then given to the children of Israel as they left. But, you know, fair amount of building materials. That's some pretty good stuff, apparently.
Didn't you wonder how they carried all that with them when they were journeying? Because
I suspect that the Egyptians may have given them carts
maybe so.
too. And evidently they would have had some sort of, I don't know if they had beasts of burden, but they had something to sacrifice. You know, they had cattle that went with them. So again, I think God moved the hearts of the Egyptians to supply
They took their own
these
livestock.
particular things.
When they left, didn't they took their own livestock, wasn't
Well, they took the livestock that was in their area, but you know they were slaves, so technically they probably didn't own anything. They probably had
That's true.
control over certain things, but basically those who were in control of the slaves said, "Look, you just take all that stuff and go away there." But you're right, because there was a period of time when God sent the plague on cattle.
And their cattle didn't die.
That's
Their
right.
animals didn't die.
Theirs did, but the Egyptian cattle did die. Okay, so from this point, starting in chapter 25, verse 10, it's interesting how we see the instructions that are given for the various elements and components. Let me just read through very quickly. You may want to follow along and just kind of mark it, but I want to think about the order in which these things are given and see if you can glean anything from it. Chapter 25, verse 10, instructions are given first about the ark and the mercy seat. Next, chapter 25, verse 23, instructions or plans are given for the table of showbread. Verse 31, the lampstand. Chapter 26, verse 1 is the linen curtain. Chapter 26, verse 7 is the goat hair covering. Chapter 26, verse 14 is the ram skin and the porpoise skin or the badger skin, whatever you want to call it. In chapter 26, verse 15, we have the instructions given for the boards and the sockets for the tabernacle building. Verse 31 is the veil and the screen. Chapter 27, verse 1 is the bronze altar, which is this outside. Chapter 27, verse 9 is the construction of the courtyard, which are these posts that define the perimeter. Chapter 30, verse 1 is the altar of incense, which is on the inside, this the smaller altar. And then chapter 30, verse 18 is the bronze laver, which is this right here. Now, that's a lot of stuff, that's a lot of detail. I wonder why it was given in that order. Anybody have an idea?
Seems like it was the most important. Was first,
Mm-hmm.
because you have all the stuff that goes inside first. And then you have the outer
Yeah.
courts.
And I think Juan is onto something. To me, when I read this, I thought, well, some of this stuff I can see. For example, I thought it was interesting that the Ark of the Covenant is built first, the Ark of the Covenant and the mercy seat, and then next, what comes is the table of showbread, and right after that is the lampstand. Now, why in that order? And I thought it was interesting. Remember when Jesus in the book of John, when he gives his I am statements, what was the first I am? First I am was, I am the bread of life, table of showbread. The second one was, I am the light of the world, the lampstand. Now, they don't all follow that way, but perhaps, to me, in fact, I think when we were studying the book of John, somebody said, it really would have made sense if he'd have said first that I am the light of the world, but he said, I'm the bread of life.
Have life.
Got to have life before you can see the light. Yeah. But anyway, maybe we can glean some significance. One of the other things that I thought too is that when I think about the detail that went into constructing the Ark of the Covenant, and particularly the Ark and then the table and then the lampstand, those things were the most difficult to build. And the last instruction is given the bronze laver, which would be pretty simple. So it's almost like a critical path schedule. I want you to start first on the things that are going to take the most time, and then you can start last on the thing that's the simplest, the bronze laver. I don't know if that's the reason for it. That could be part of the reason for it. Or it could very well be that it's going in the order of significance. Although, all of these things really fit together to tell a story. If you leave anything out, something is lost.
But weren't a lot of people working on all different things at the same time? So they would culminate, but he gave the instructions for these first because you were thinking, okay, so we have the insides, they're going to get, well, maybe not wet, but it needed to be protected. But you had millions of people working to
Yeah, you have. We're going to see there are two chief. It's interesting. We see that God's Spirit is upon these two master builders. We're going to see two guys in particular kind of organizing all this stuff, and they're kind of heading up the construction. But yes, I suspect a lot of people were working on it at the same time.
We have no idea how much time lapsed between one and the other.
No, we don't. But they got it done pretty quickly. We're going to read about that. We have some details about that, about when they had their first ceremony. But let's talk about these. Let's come to an understanding of each one of these things, how they were to be constructed, what they were made of, and roughly the size of these things as we go through. So the first is the Ark of the Covenant. And anybody here who did not see Raiders of the Lost Ark? Okay, so you got an idea. And I think what they showed in that movie was probably, as good a visual depiction of the Ark of the Covenant and the mercy seat as any I've seen. And it is true, as a side note, that Hitler was very intrigued by, of course, he was trying to exterminate the Jews, but he recognized that they were God's chosen people, and he recognized. He thought there was power in various of these implements, and so he did in fact conscript and assign people the task of locating various of these things that are referred to both in the Old Testament and the New Testament. He never did find the lost ark, as far as we know, but he did find some of the other things. For example, there's supposedly the spear that was thrust into Jesus' side. I think that was one of the things that he found, and it's in a cathedral, I think, in Austria somewhere now. But anyway, he did search for those things. So anyway, Ark of the Covenant, chapter 25, verse 10. Joanne, would you start reading for us?
And they shall make an ark of shittim wood, 2 cubits and a half shall be in length thereof, and 1.5 cubits, the breadth thereof, and 1.5 cubits to the height thereof.
Pause just a second. Let's digest that. All right, so the first thing we have is, I need a pen that writes. One is the, sorry about that. One, Ark of the Covenant. Okay. And what are the dimensions of it?
3 3/4 foot
let's get the cubits first. It says
2.5 cubits.
2.5 cubits by what?
1.5 cubits, I think.
1.5 cubits by what?
1.5.
1.5, okay. So 2.5 cubits would be what?
3 3/4.
3 3/4 feet.
Quarter feet, maybe?
3 3/4, yeah, that would be, yeah. So how many inches would that be?
36.
Get out the calculator.
What are we doing?
18 times 2.5 would be 36, and 9 is 45 inches. So that's only 45 inches by 27 inches
That's not quite 4 feet.
by 27 inches.
Right.
No,
Not very big.
no.
Here's a depiction of it so you can kind of keep it in mind. Okay? Now, obviously this is not to scale, but again, 45 inches, it's not very big. 45 inches by 27 inches by 27 inches, not a very big thing. And it's made out of what?
Acacia
It's made out of acacia wood or shittim wood, is some of the translations say, but it's this very durable wood, and then it's covered with gold. What's the significance of this thing being constructed with wood? The spiritual significance of constructed out of wood, but then covered with gold. Particularly as it relates to Christ, what would that symbolize about Christ? The wood would represent one thing and the gold would represent something else. What?
I think the wood would represent the cross.
That possibly, but also it is said that the wood was a living thing, represented his flesh. In other words, his humanness, and the gold represented his godliness. That Christ was both human, he was flesh, and he was also the Spirit of God. So it is said that in this particular aspect that the Ark of the Covenant represents him in that way. Okay, read on. Verse 12. Joanne.
And thou shalt cast 4 rings of gold for it, and put them in 4 corners thereof. And 2 rings shall be in one side of it, and 2 rings on the other side of it. And thou shalt make staves of the shittim wood, and overlay them with gold. And thou shalt put the staves into the rings by the sides of the ark, and the ark may be borne with them. The staves shall be in the rings of the ark, they shall not be taken from it.
All right, pause right there just a second. So you can see, we got this little ark. So it's got the rings in the side, okay? You see those on each side there? And then you got the poles or the staves that are sent through there. And the obvious purpose of those poles, if you will, the staves is what?
To carry it.
Carried around. And God says that those staves are to stay in there. And according to the scripture, some translations of the scripture, those staves, those poles, were not removed until such time as the Ark of the Covenant was actually taken from the tabernacle and installed in the temple. Okay? And at that point in time, then the staves were removed, indicating that was God's plan all along, that they would be moved around. And we know that the Ark of the Covenant symbolized many things, one of which was God's presence. And I ran over too quickly one of the points that was made in verse 8 that I don't want any of us to miss. God's reason for giving the instruction to construct the sanctuary is stated in verse 8, and he says, that I may dwell among them. This is one of the most important aspects of all of the scriptures that deal with the tabernacle, is God's purpose for giving his instructions to the people to construct the tabernacle is that God had a desire to dwell among them. Okay? So this is coming from God's heart. And that, of course, was ultimately fulfilled in Christ too. God wanted his desire was to live among his people. He wanted to live among them in a skin tent. Okay, which he ultimately did in the form of Jesus the man. That God actually lived in a skin tent among the people, which was his desire from way back. And that was all motivated by nothing other than his love for his people. So we have a tremendous lesson in that too. And again, that relates to the portability of this, that the staves were to remain in the Ark of the Covenant so it could be moved around as God gave instructions to his people to move around. The Ark always went ahead of them. So God was leading them to the place, God was continually leading his people to the place where he wanted them to be. And of course, there's tremendous spiritual significance in that as well. Any other comment about the Ark of the Covenant? Okay, the next thing we have is, and we think of these two together. In fact, in the movie, the Ark of the Covenant and the mercy seat are portrayed as a single thing, although they were two different things. The next thing is called the mercy seat in verse 17. Terry, is that you?
Sure. It says, make an atonement cover of pure gold, 2.5 cubits long, and 1.5 cubits wide, and make 2 cherubim out of hammered gold at the ends of the cover. Make 1 cherub on one end and the second cherub on the other. Make the cherubim of one piece with the cover at the 2 ends. The cherubim are to have their wings spread upward, overshadowing the cover with them. The cherubim are to face each other, looking toward the cover. Place the cover on top of the ark and put in the ark the testimony, which I will give you. There above the cover between the 2 cherubim that are over the ark of the testimony, I will meet with you and give you all my commands for the Israelites. Continue.
No, that's good right there. I just love that verse 22 where he says, and there I will meet with you. Now, what Terry was just describing is, my translation calls it the mercy seat. What does yours call it, Terry? The cover of atonement?
The atonement cover.
Okay. I like both of those. The idea of atonement is what? A coming together, a forgiveness. The mercy seat, we all know what mercy is. And I think it's very interesting and it's symbolic that the mercy seat or the atonement goes on top of the Ark of the Covenant. And what's inside the Ark of the Covenant?
Manna.
Right. But here God says what's inside of this.
Testimony.
Just a testimony. In other words, that would be the law of the 10 Commandments. Okay. So at this point in time, God had given the 10 Commandments. They were, and God wrote them on stone, and ultimately they were broken and remade and put back in here. But at the time that the 10 Commandments, the testimony, if you will, were put into the Ark of the Covenant, they had already been broken. Right? The original 10 Commandments that were written by the finger of God brought them, Moses brought them down from the mountain. And what's the first thing that Moses sees? You're going to read about that later on.
The golden calf.
The golden calf. Idolatry. Worshiping, breaking the first commandment. And of course, they were all about breaking all the rest of it at the same time too. But by the time this is done, the law had been given, the law had been broken, the people had broken the covenant. So by the time this is built, the people very much need the atonement, or they need the mercy, which goes on top of the broken law. I think very symbolic in that. So these go together. And it's also very interesting that we're going to read later on that once a year, the chief priest would enter into the Holy of Holies. And the Ark of the Covenant is placed inside of the building, but in the Holy of Holies. It's not placed in the front part, it's placed in the very back part called the Holy of Holies. This is basically the only thing that's there. It's separated by a screen. We're going to talk about the screen later on. But once a year, the chief priest would go into, on the Day of Atonement, he would go into the Holy of Holies, and what would he bring in there with him? He would bring blood in there. And he would place the blood on the mercy seat. So when the angels, the cherubim are looking down, they're on either side, they have their wings extended and they're looking down. They, in the place of God, they're looking down, and what do they see? The first thing they see before they see the broken law,
The sacrifice.
they see the blood of the sacrifice. And just like God had told them earlier, when I see the blood, I will pass over you. I will not destroy you. So they're being reminded here of one of the lessons they learned at the Passover, and also the significance of the blood, which we studied before. Okay, let's write this down. We got Ark of the Covenant, and then we got the mercy seat. I'm gonna write atonement too because I like that. And what's the dimension of that?
2.5 cubits long and 1.5 cubits wide.
So exactly the dimension of the Ark of the Covenant, so it fits just right down on top of it. And it's interesting that the mercy seat, or the atonement seat, is not made of the acacia wood. What's it made of?
Pure
gold.
Pure gold. And in one of the references I was looking at, this thing was made out of one piece of gold that was hammered gold. It was not cast gold. And when they estimated the amount of gold that it would take in today's standards, I think it would take about $10 million worth of gold just to make that mercy seat. So there's nothing boring about that, is there, Tommy?
So the cost of our salvation is very high.
Exactly. And I think that's the significance of it. Our atonement, the mercy that God extends to us, it is a very costly thing. It cost him a lot. We should never undervalue God's mercy and his atonement. Okay. We out of time? Okay. Well, I thought we'd gotten farther along. But anyway, all right. So next time we're going to pick up and we're going to go through these elements, and like I said, we're going to learn what each one of these things, what each one of these elements of the tabernacle is about and what it symbolizes.